Can we medicate ourselves out of what I regard as one of the biggest chronic disease epidemics in history? Literally, COVID pales into insignificance in terms of the medical impact and on our lives of our lifestyles, because 90% of chronic disease is actually lifestyle-driven. So that's really the punchline of the talk, which is that ask yourself this question: is it a good idea for us as a society to try and medicate our way out of something as fundamental as how much we weigh? Additional to that is the context that 20% of people that we label as obese actually are meant to be obese, are meant to be the weight they are. That is the genetic, evolutionary selected genetic makeup of 20% of people so-called obese. So a lot of the messaging we have in our society, I think, is completely mistaken. And I think that the whole era of GLP-1 agonists that Leslie talked about, Ozempic, Wegovy, on another name for the most popular one today, the most recent one called semaglutide is the actual name, is a real problem. That said, it's clearly fantastic for people who really need a bit of a leg up, who really are struggling with weight loss when they do need to lose weight, particularly with people who already have got a clear indication of a metabolic problem, like type 2 diabetes, like high blood pressure, like other cardiovascular risk factors. But the key question is, 50% of people over the age of 50 already have a chronic disease. 31%, this is UK government stats, 31% of the UK workforce, overall, all ages, has a chronic disease. Is that a state we want to be in? And do we think that an injectable, a weekly injectable, is going to inject us out of this problem? And I would argue it's not. That's the punchline. Now I'm going to go into both the benefits and the harms I see from drugs like the GLP-1 agonists, focusing on right now semaglutide, but that clearly is the one that is most effective in terms of weight loss. It was approved in December 2017, okay, so just over 5 years ago, for type 2 diabetes. Okay, now that's really important. It's approved for a specific indication and the clear evidence is that other GLP-1 agonists had shown weight loss. So it was something that the pharmaceutical industry knew was a really good way to actually help people lose weight. And the way this works is simple. GLP-1 agonist is a glucagon-like peptide type 1 agonist. What that does, it enhances the secretion of insulin in response to what you're eating. I won't go into the detail. I'm not going to go into the biochemical detail, but the important message to keep in mind is this is a powerful regulator. It's mimicking the effect of a hormone called glucagon, which we all are producing all the time. And the industry have very cleverly created a small molecule and changed its chemistry to be much more persistent in your body, unlike glucagon, which is rapidly cleared. So that's what it's doing, okay? So that's why it was first invented, was for actual sugar metabolism for people with type 2 diabetes. The side effect, which is also part of its mechanism of action, are two other things. One is it is a central appetite suppressant, which is why most of us think, oh, that's a great idea. I'd love one of those if I want to lose weight. And the second one, not so great, is that it delays gastric emptying, which is why you tend to eat smaller meals when you're taking these meds or getting the injection. Now, that's a significant problem because we know that with the injectable, those side effects, because most people suffer initially with severe or moderate to severe gastrointestinal side effects because of that delayed gastric emptying. Not surprising, people get constipated, get nauseous, want to vomit, etc. But most people get over it. But it's still there. It's still delaying your gastric emptying. It's just that you've adapted and got used to it. So the issue is, what could possibly go wrong with delaying your gastric emptying, right? You might have read about the proton pump inhibitors and things that interfere with the production of acid in your stomach, ranitidine being an example. Now the question is, does that drive cancer 20 or 30 years later? And that's the problem with all new drugs. Every new drug on the market will have known side effects from the clinical trials. with people with type 2 diabetes, but it becomes very different when you suddenly release the drug into the general population. So 10% of the UK and the US population more or less have type 2 diabetes, which is ridiculous as an idea, but that's true. But 90% don't, and therefore, clearly, don't have a completely different lifestyle to people with type 2 diabetes, but clearly, they have something different in their metabolism, and here you've got a drug interfering with the metabolism. So, what could happen in the long term, we simply don't know. We simply don't know today. We're only a year out into the general population, so we've no idea what the long-term side effects of these drugs are going to be. Cue an example of what could happen when things go wrong with these drugs, which are what we call off-target side effects, when it's just a random event, right? Called off-target. The one is, how many people here have heard of a drug called Vioxx? So a few, but most haven't, so I will explain what it is. So Vioxx is a drug that was approved in 1999, a brilliant idea for people with arthritis. It was a drug that was designed to prevent the inflammation and pain of arthritis, but preserve your gastric mucosa and your intestinal lining, because one of the big side effects of anti-arthritis drugs is called non-steroidals, things like ibuprofen, which probably most people are taking, or naproxen. Their major side effect is gastrointestinal bleeding. You can actually bleed to death. So what a great idea to come up with a drug that's much more specific. Now, the pathway, the biochemical pathway for these mediators that protect your gastric mucosa, also a part of the pathway that deliver sort of pain relief, if you like, an anti-inflammatory effect. So they wanted to block just the one arm and preserve the arm that delivered the protection of your gastric mucosa. And it worked to treat in the clinical trials. Brilliant. No one died of a gastrointestinal bleed. And it got released into the general population. And within 5 years, but only after 5 years, the doctors start noticing that people that had started on these drugs were dropping dead of heart attacks and strokes. And we estimate that in those 5 years, the medical profession, my profession, killed about 300,000 people, right? The industry's own analysis was around about 100,000. It was probably more like 300,000 were either killed or seriously harmed with a heart attack or a stroke, right? And Merck, their share price dropped by 30%, but they survived. But they killed a lot of people, right? And who knew, right, that actually at the bottom, right down that sophisticated biochemical pathway, was a little molecule called thromboxane, TXA2, the most potent thrombotic clotting agent in our bodies. So if you were on the way to getting a stroke in a few years' time or a heart attack, bang, you were dead, okay? So I say that, I tell you that, not to be alarmist, but because we're at the early stages of the GLP-1 agonists, particularly semaglutide and the next generations. So my strong advice is, yes, it's a fantastic leg up for people who really have high risk of real harm from being grossly overweight with other risk factors, like type 2 or like hypertension and so on. But proceed with extreme caution. Focus much more. Even if you are taking those drugs, focus enormously on your lifestyle, on those, the SML, which I love, Sir Christopher, we call it, at Added Health, we call it the 5 pillars. So focus on what you're eating. Go veganish for sure. Focus on that exercise. It'll do you a power of good. Focus on your sleep. Focus on your mental well-being and stress levels. And most of all, focus on your relationships. Surround yourself with people that really give you positive energy, that love you and that you can love. And I'll open it up for questions after saying Ubuntu.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate it. Do we have any questions for Dr. Stein? No questions about these drugs?
I could sit here and talk to you for hours. Okay, so
You need to talk to Mike.
I'm trying to think of the right short question, because clearly I could talk to you for hours. Okay. So I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Rin Miyake Lai. I was originally trained as a cell biologist in the Department of Biochemistry and Biophysics, and for the last well, since 2001, when I happened to be working at a biotech where they developed a beautiful treatment for, a really wonderful treatment for multiple myeloma. And instead of corruption and horribleness, I actually got to see biotech executives, clinical oncologists, and the federal government all working on behalf of a wonderful patient advocate, okay? All work together to get this drug to the people most likely to benefit. Okay, 16 years go by and nothing's happened with personalized medicine, getting new treatments to the right people, right? There's no magic bullet. I mean, giving one drug to a whole bunch of people isn't gonna be a path to health. I mean, so this has been, the entire morning's been like music to my ears. Okay, so one quick question. Is it worth revisiting metabolic set point? Do you remember? Okay.
Yeah, so we all have our own metabolic set points. Some people are going to eat food, retain more of the calories and retain more weight than other people. There's clearly a genetics. I mean, if you think about it, on a given day, we've got about 28 different body systems. We've got, within those body systems, a few thousand different types of differentiated cells. And in each of those cells, there are 20,000 genes being expressed at any one time. And those 20,000 genes, if one gene product interacts with one other gene product, you've got an exponential interactions of 2 to the 20,000, okay? On top of that, you now have about 120 known epigenetic factors. These are the environmental regulators of those 20,000 genes. So you've got another 120 levers on top. So you've got 2 to the 20,000 now by additional, the numbers are just mind-boggling. And each of us is completely unique. And each of us has a metabolic set point, right? Which it will be different. The other point about metabolic set points is that some of us will respond very differently to a carb-heavy diet versus a low-carb diet. And the best advice I can give people is to say, try stuff out, right? See what fits you, but know that the most important thing is to eat lots and lots of healthy, nutrient-rich veggies and salads, and watch out for fruit. Eat fruit, but unfortunately, the farmers know they're sugar cells. So we've got now hybrids of apples that are just 20, 30% more sugar than they used to have. So stick with the species, the older species, the Braeburns and the Coxes versus the Pink Ladies and the Pink Lady apples, as an example. But it's a minefield, and we're just at the beginning, I think, of a journey as a society where we need to drive our political leaders to recognize that we are all unique, all have different set points. We all want to try and optimize that set point for ourselves, and we do that through Sir Christopher's or the Adult Health 5 pillars. And essentially, my view is that the only way we're going to get to be a much more vibrant and healthy and resilient society is to push our political leaders to implement policies, right? And it's striking in this country, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, nearly died of COVID. He was one of the cohort that was clearly obese, and he has actually tried the GLP-1 agonists, and he couldn't tolerate them, so he's back to trying lifestyle. He writes in the Daily Mail. But I mean, he did a complete U-turn. So he had was in intensive care. Oh, we need to do something about it. Announces $100 million for a healthy eating rewards program. Brilliant idea. Gets Sir Keith Mills, the guy who invented Air Miles and the nectar system in this country. And then we pitched up, a lot of us pitched up to have the meeting, and the budget had gone from 100 million to 5 million. And that whole program, I've not heard anything about it from 2 years ago now. So we really need to hold our government to account. And I will be controversial, I don't normally be political, but I think it's a national imperative to change our government, to change our leadership for all our health. Because I happen to know and happen to be fortunate enough to have been neighbors with Keir Starmer in London for 4 years, and I also happen to, and I can publicly say that one of our added health clients, because he's given us a testimonial, is Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. And between Sir Ed and Keir, hopefully we'll have a new government, hopefully we'll have real leadership, hopefully we'll have people who really care about the health of our nation for the UK, but it's a problem that's global, there's no question. And it's a problem that it will require us to be very brave and very persistent in addressing these issues, particularly with massive industries, not the pharma. Pharma industry actually is moving quite quickly in the right direction. Companies like Novo Nordisk, the makers of semaglutide, which is Ozempic, are actually taking the lifestyle issues seriously and are a responsible company, I'm happy to say. But unfortunately, we've also got the whole of the food industry, that little industry, and we've got the whole of the drinks and alcohol industry. So we've got some real challenges, but I think there feels like there's a real move politically and enough push to overcome the strong lobby from companies that aren't really interested in keeping us healthy.
Mike, what do you think about the role of industry? You know, in Japan, they very famously take policy from government, academia, and commerce, and they join it up. And I have some of my Harvard Business School classmates here today who might be able to help push things in the right direction. Do the food companies have a role to play in reducing the amount of sugar?
Without a doubt. I mean, we absolutely, but we all need, unfortunately, sugar is addictive, right? We find it incredibly tasty and sweet. That's no accident, right? Evolution has made our taste buds have sugar, which is an incredibly energy-dense form of calorie. So we seek it out, and the affinity of your taste of sugar overcomes its affinity for pretty much everything else. And so that's a real problem for all of us, and we need a bit of help. So for me, it's a bit like how we dealt with tobacco and smoking. We tax the hell out of it, so I think we should be absolutely, on behalf of ourselves and our children, be taxing the hell out of sugar and ultra-processed foods, because actually the more you process a food, the less nutrient-rich it becomes, and there's another whole story about the quality of our soils and so on. But fundamentally, we need to create a tax system for sugar and make it much more like with warnings everywhere, like you have on the cigarette packets, so for sugar and processed and ultra-processed foods. And we should reward, and we should have a healthy eating reward program for people who are least wealthy in our society, because as I think we're all aware, the experience of COVID, we know, and we've known for years before COVID, that the lower socioeconomic groups in our society need the most help because they have the highest rate of chronic disease, which is lifestyle, because they're eating a lot of sugary processed foods because it's cheap.
No, I know.
We need to support them with incentives, which you can do very easily with points, from the supermarkets when you go. I happen to have private health insurance. I have Vitality, and I get rewarded. I go to my supermarket, and because I take care of my health, they give me 40% discount on my veggies. Oh, wow. Guess what my wife does? She buys a lot of veggies. Even though, we are fully aware, but it kind of just gives you that extra little, like, wow, I've got a 40%. We can't afford to do this as a society. In this country, our insurance company is the NHS, right? It is the government. It is national insurance. There's no reason why we couldn't implement that today.
There is an issue, though. Sorry.
That's okay.
So Henry Dimbleby's written the food strategy for the government, and he recently wrote this book called Ravenous, which I recommend to read, Food Fix by Dr. Mark Hyman. The issue here is the government are not adopting the strategy that he's proposed, and so despite being paid by the government to write a strategy for the UK, they're not actually adopting the proposal, number one of which is reduction in sugar. So I think we have, as a population, we have that opportunity to vote with our mouths, vote with our pockets, and vote with our votes to change it, because we've already seen that there's been huge change in the context of recycling and straws, that we now are no longer plastic, but they're paper. We need to stand on our feet a lot more, I think, and we have the power to do that, and especially for children and educating children.
I think,
Fully agree.
yes. Those of us who are in this room are probably more educated and have more privilege and the ability to buy Vitality health insurance, which rewards us. For those who are at the lower end of the socioeconomic strata, what would you say we do for them? That is really dependent on government policy, or perhaps the health coaches that Added Health is using.
No, I think it's policy. I'd love it to be. We Added Health, we're basically a brains trust of docs who've got fed up with what's going on, and that we know as docs and we know as physiologists that it's about lifestyle. That's 90% of the issue that we've got with this unbelievable epidemic of chronic disease. And so a group of us got together. So it's Chris Butler, the professor of primary care here. We've just in the last few weeks got David Bates, the professor of medicine at Harvard. We've got the preventive cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic, Charles Cannon. We've got the most prolific orthopedic surgeon who's been there and done that, doesn't want to do any more hip and knee replacements. Michael Solomon, he's part of that editorial board, that brains trust, to look at the fire hose of information that's coming out in the space, looking at it as medical scientists, people who really understand the physiology of biochemistry, and go, that makes sense, and let's promote that. And we have a layer of coaches, if you like, nutritionists and psychologists and so on, that distribute that information in a way that, but essentially what we're really building is a way of automating that access to that knowledge that essentially is unimpeachable. So we're at the beginning of a long journey, a long way to go. We've got other people from other fantastic institutions coming on board as well. And so we firmly believe, though, that the biggest lever is policy, government policy, and that the government could do exactly what Vitality's done with using national insurance to fund those rewards for people who can't afford. We already have a system where we know who can't afford stuff, right? And so when those folks go into the supermarket without any kind of shame or judgment, can just, when they check out with their veggies, boy, they get a whole lot of reward points that then sets them up to buy more next time. It's exactly the same way I get a 40%. So effectively, it's a discount through a point system, which is very straightforward to do. All the supermarkets, every single one of the major supermarkets have a point system already. Every one of our supermarkets knows exactly what we're buying, right? So we could actually, with a real political will, implement policy that fundamentally changes what we eat at every level in society in a really positive way.
So when can we get you to work with the government?
Well, Ed, you don't need Ed Davies there. I mean, he's totally and I haven't spoken with Kia yet, but I sure will.
Very good. We have time for another question. Does anyone have one? Let's see. There's someone. Okay. Okay. Good. Yep.
I just wanted to pick up on something that we talked about last night, because it's super important because I see this in practice all the time, because everyone wants this medication, because celebrities have been all over Instagram telling us how amazing it's changed their life. But what we notice that, as you noted as well, it seems to change people's relationship, not just with food, but also with tobacco and alcohol. So could the next generation of these kind of substances, if we have to use them, because the brain and addiction is a massive problem, a lot of us know that the Mars bar is bad for us, that the beer is bad for us, etc. Could it be that we look at ways of modulating top-down desire for these substances?
Again, it's about, whether we want to, do we think it's a good idea to medicate our way out of addiction, or do we want to change who we are? Not change who we are, but understand and recognize who we are. So my particular viewpoint is that actually behavior change, you don't need to tell a smoker who comes into the clinic, stop smoking. They know it's bad for them. So what we were talking about last night, I agree. These semaglutide in particular looks like it's acting on a dopaminergic pathway in your brain, in part of your brainstem, in your lower part of your brain, that actually is also part of the part that drives addictions, like smoking or alcohol and so on. And so people have noticed that they seem to be less desirous of alcohol or smoking if they are addicted in that way when they take the drug. The evidence isn't yet clear, but what we do know already, we've seen quite a few people who, where the effect of the drug has worn off. So we had one of our first clients who was in one of the semaglutide trials and continued. 2 years on, it's not working anymore. Now what? Now you really got to drive lifestyle within, what else can you, but my view is that we should be starting that process so yes, it will be very beneficial to give people a leg up where the risk reward, because as I say, we don't know what the long-term risks of these drugs are. It may well be Vioxx, right? It may well be that we'll find in women who conceive on taking, you end up with a thalidomide, God forbid, situation, right? So, but my deeper sense is that we need to really help people change their habits, and that we have enough scientific knowledge to know how to do that for the long term, that we don't need to keep people medicated, particularly because it's a point solution for an incredibly complicated being, right? Unbelievably complicated. I think it's much more sensible to focus on, really being the hero of your journey, something that you spoke about, and really getting that internal motivation that drives behavior change. It's got to come from within you as the individual. And that I think will actually, in the end state, it's funny, we in Keble College, one of the fellows, recently appointed fellows of this college is a guy called UC Westergren. I don't know if you know UC, Sir Christopher. But he's a mathematician, and he studies the mathematics of quantum entanglement. And fundamentally, Ubuntu turns out to be quite mathematically predictable, according to UC, who happens to be a fellow here. And that I think that it's what the Surgeon General of the United States said, Vivek Murthy, about what is the biggest killer in the United States. It was actually, he said, loneliness. Because we're actually not, and that's why COVID has had such a devastating impact on our young folks, whose brains are busy developing, and we are gregarious primates that love to sniff each other and pick fleas and hug, that's us, right? And I think that a pill is not going to ever really take us towards that increase in what I'd call Ubuntu. And you'll hear more about the mathematics. UC's writing a book, which is, I think, going to be published in October. It's absolutely fascinating, because it really takes you in a whole different realm.
Great. We've got 2 more questions from up here. One from our computational biologist from France.
Thank you. Hi. So a quick question on that discrepancy between population medicine and personalized medicine, or what the clinician facing a patient have to deal with versus the policymakers. So when I was at WHO, we have seen like a few things that were systematically helping were just removing stuff. Remove alcohol, remove smoking, remove trans fat, remove pollution, ideally, but complicated. These kind of things. So population-wise, we get it, but once we get drugs like Ozempic, or we had the statins in the past, we had anti-cholesterol drugs that gives this marginal gain on the population size and a small gain individually. What has been your experience, or what do you see when clinicians are faced with that? Are they expected to just follow policymakers, or can they deal patient by patient really in a personalized way?
Great question. So a clinician always has the ability to use their own judgment in relationship with their patient, with their client, to make most decisions, right? So they don't have to follow, so even if NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence here, approves a drug like a statin, there's no absolute requirement you have to do it. Obviously, you would tell the client, look, you're in a mild to moderate risk of cardiovascular disease, your cholesterol's a little bit up, we can give you a statin. We need to give over about 108 people a statin in your particular risk category to prevent 1 heart attack in 10 years, over 10 years. So that's the actual stats. But and then a lot of people, when they hear, what? You got to treat more than 100 people to save 1 heart attack? What else you got for me, doc? And then that introduces the lifestyle discussion and eating more veggies, because actually, if you look at what they call the numbers needed to treat, you'll be well aware of that. That's the numbers you need to treat to see the effect you look for, that, as in the statins. The numbers needed to treat for a veggie, going veganish, it's ridiculous. It's like 2. So, there's a very big discrepancy, but docs have the ability to have that conversation and present the risk rewards in different ways. Now, the industry obviously pushes statins, and that's a huge challenge, because you just follow the money, right? Vioxx, $2.5 billion in revenues within its first year of coming through the trials. I mean, it was spectacular revenues. You know, and Merck was making money hand and fist. So, you only heard all the good news. So the docs, you know, were only hearing a lot, and then slowly, oh, but hang on a minute, that's the third patient I started on Vioxx and they dropped dead of a heart attack. You know, and so that's a huge issue, is the money. There isn't marketing budget for people to do the healthy eating, do the healthy exercising. There is some, and it's getting better, but it's not nearly the amount of money that's funding the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, the drinks industry. Drinks is another great example, right? Now, quick question. Is the safe limit of drinking alcohol in terms of units, multiple choice, is it 21 units, 14, 7, or 0? 0. Yeah, so this is a well-educated audience, right? The vast majority of the population has no idea about that. They haven't read the biobank data from last year that clearly showed that even at 7 units of alcohol a week, we are shrinking our brains, literally, both gray matter and white matter, statistically significant. But of course, in that week that the information came out, I was looking for the obfuscation publications from the industry, and sure enough, there it was. There was I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the dailies that actually alcohol's good for you in that same week. Why? Because they'd done a study that showed that people who are attending a specialist clinic at hospitals drink less alcohol than people who attend a clinic for less severe illness. Without thinking about the people who are really sick, do you really want to drink alcohol? So, it's that kind of stuff. So that's a huge, huge problem. And I think that's why I'm very keen for policy change and use of public funds to create reward systems that actually help people who are most in need.